Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Down the Rabbit Hole. My name is Nina. I'm here with my producer, Edgar, who is probably not mic'd. Not mic'd. We are actually kind of transitioning studios a little bit, and we're a little bit delayed, both of us tonight. So thanks for bearing with us and tuning in. I know that we're starting more around 9 than around the 8:30 mark, like I said. But I hope that you guys will enjoy the show that I prepared for you tonight. I have a lot of thoughts. As I mentioned last time I did the podcast, it seems like every time I do this, because inevitably I end up taking a few weeks off, that the entire world changes every time I do a podcast. So I just want to talk a little bit tonight, in particular, as indicated by my little marker here. I want to talk about race relations a little bit, because I think that America has sort of lost our way, or sort of lost the plot in terms of race relations. We really have lost, or rather unlearned, the lessons from Martin Luther King and from Malcolm X, especially after he returned from his trip from Mecca. So we're gonna revisit some ideas regarding race relations that I think are really important. After that, I'll talk about the right to bear arms as it pertains to my property manifesto, because I do think the right to bear arms is more important than ever right now. And then lastly, we're going to talk about two saints that I think are important to know about for the current times we're in. I'll say a little prayer to them, talk about their biography. Hopefully they can help America get us through these crazy, unprecedented times that we're in. So, to start, whenever people talk about race these days, you know, it's really a dangerous topic. Let's be honest about that. So I'd like to first start by talking about my racial background. Now, a lot of people will accuse me of, I don't know, loving identity politics because I even mention this. But the truth is that if I don't mention this or talk about it, people will just try to discredit anything I say in this section as being worthless, because I don't necessarily appear to be, you know, the blackest person on the planet. But I am part black. I am French Creole. And I have, personally, I would never submit to a DNA reading of my racial background just because I don't trust, you know, Ancestry.com to have my DNA. But both of my parents have done this, and I have their readouts right here in front of me. You know, to just be sort of, to do a summary of their DNA results. On my father's side, he's about 48% European and then 46% African. He's also got 5% European Jewish and 1% Native American. Among those European nations there, it's mostly from England, France. France is big. I'm French Creole. France is going to be big. And then Germany, Ireland, those are the big ones. And then from Africa, Nigeria, Cameroon, Congo, Senegal, Mali. You know, those are the biggest African nations where my father has ancestry from, or DNA from. My mother, she is slightly more European than my father. She is 66% European, 30% African, 3% Middle Eastern, and 1% Native American. And similar to my father, a big part of my mother's European ancestry comes from France. That's actually her biggest. It's 26%. The next largest is Italy, which we actually found out that basically my great-grandfather on my mother's side was probably 100% Italian, was a first-generation Italian immigrant to America. So that was something we only found out kind of recently, which was pretty cool. She also has England, of course, and Spain. In terms of her African heritage, it's mostly from Cameroon, Congo, Nigeria, Senegal, Mali, Ghana. Those are kind of the countries there. It is interesting. She's got some Iranians, and she also has that Native American background too. I would like to point out just briefly that both of my parents are more Native American than Elizabeth Warren. Just for a moment. I just wanted to point that out. But I just also wanted to bring this up because let's say that I'm split halfway perfectly between my parents. Ultimately, that would mean that I'm somewhere around 40% African. I might be at like 38% African, and then a little over 50% European, and then I've got the European Jewish, the Middle Eastern, the American going on. But I generally, if I'm talking in in broad terms, I would often say that I'm about 40% Black and about 60% European. Which I think that based on my parents' DNA results is, if we're rounding, that's pretty accurate. So, for anyone who tries to tell me that basically I have no right to speak on this issue because I'm just some white chick, it's really not true. I should also mention that it's not just that I have African ancestry. If you trace my ancestors, first of all, both of my parents lived through segregation in this country. They had to drink out of colored-only water fountains. They had to go to colored-only movie theaters, colored-only swimming pools, all colored-only services. This whole idea that because I'm part white means that I'm more privileged, that's all well and good to entertain, but in this country we had the one-drop rule, and it did not matter how, white or black you looked. All that mattered was if you had a one drop of black blood. And if you did, then you were colored, and that was how it was. So my parents lived through that. Okay, that's not several generations away. That's my parents. All right. If you go further back, I have ancestors that were slaves in this country. They were slaves in Louisiana, and that's just the truth. They're in the census as slaves. As you might have guessed, because I am mixed, I also have ancestors that were slave owners too. And me and my family, we don't look fondly upon those ancestors of mine. But the truth is that there were ancestors in my family who were slaves on plantations in the South and who were subjugated to all of the brutality that comes along with that. Now, in my own life, I have not been exposed to nearly the kind of, gross racism that my parents experienced, or the kind that my ancestors went through when they were slaves. Like, I can't even pretend that I have gone through that kind of racism in my life, personally. But I have experienced racism, and interestingly enough, it often comes from black people, and that's just the truth. My first experience of racism when I was a little kid. I can't have been more than 12 years old. I was in Houston with my parents, and we were at a fried chicken restaurant. And basically, I don't know, the guy in line near us, he either thought we were taking too long to order or something, I don't know. But he called us white N-words and basically told us to get out of the way. So the first time I was called the N-word was actually because I was a white version of that. Being mixed, people always forget that actually being mixed, you face plenty of racism. It's not like because I'm not deep chocolate, I don't face racism. In fact, when I was in law school, there were people questioning whether or not I really should be in the Black Law Students Association because was I really black enough? It's like, well, my parents lived through segregation. My ancestors were slaves. I mean, like, my hair is crazy and frizzy. Like, I had to get it relaxed for it to look like this. I mean, I don't really sunburn. I do have some melanin in my skin. It's like, I'm not black enough, I guess. I guess the one drop rule, that was the way that we thought about it for so long, but now that just doesn't matter, That's been thrown away. And this is kind of the whole idea of colorism. Which is that the hue of your skin tone is really what defines how oppressed you are. Like, if you're more chocolate, you get more oppression than if you're, more like me, where I'm kind of more caramel in my skin tone. And similarly, I've had people tell me, this is the same person tell me this, that I can't forget that I'm black like her. Like, I'm no better than her, right? but at the same time to remember that I'm not as oppressed as her because I look kind of white. So it's like, am I less oppressed, or am I exactly the same? And so this is something that I've always faced. I've faced backlash from people because, you know, my hair, it's capable of, you know, being blown out to this straightness. It's like, oh, what a privilege that is. Or I guess, I don't know, because you look at me and you're not 100% sure immediately what my race is, that's some kind of privilege, you know? But when I was in high school, my high school English teacher brought me up in front of the whole class and asked what my racial background was because he couldn't tell, and he thought it would be sort of an interesting experience for the only person in the class who wasn't completely white to explain what their racial background was. I had no idea he was going to do that. He made me stand in front of the class to do that. So I just want to point out that, like, just because I don't look like I'm straight out of Africa necessarily doesn't mean that I haven't faced racism. It doesn't mean that my parents didn't face racism, and it certainly doesn't mean that my ancestors weren't slaves on this continent, which they were. So, I just want to give that whole backdrop before people get up in the comments talking about how some white girl thinks that she can opine on race. Because I get plenty of that on my Twitter. Those people are crazy. So, with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about the lessons that we've forgotten. And I hope you'll bear with me. I am going to read some direct quotes from both Martin Luther King and from Malcolm X. But I want to read the quotes instead of paraphrasing them because so many people have tried to twist their words, and especially with Malcolm X, people really focus on his message before he went to Mecca and kind of learn the actual important lessons about race. So I want to actually read what these men said. These are two of the most important men in the civil rights movement in America. These are the men that helped, people of both the white and black race come together and not be so hateful of each other. How did they do that? Right? How did we have a situation where people were protesting in the streets for equality during segregation to now a place where all we focus on is race, right? How were they able to get past race while we are so obsessed with it? And I think it's because some of this language that I'm going to go through right now. So, I printed out the full text of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, and don't worry, I'm not going to read the full text. It's too long for that, but I am going to read several paragraphs. So, the first, I want to read this section because a lot of people have been out there praising rioting and looting as if it's somehow beneficial to the cause of ending racism in this country. And I want to read to you what Martin Luther King said. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous militancy which has engulfed the Negro community, and I'm sorry, I'm saying that because it's a direct quote, must not lead us to distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. They have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we will always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? And we can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of unspeakable horrors of police brutality. And I'll read other excerpts too, but I want to stop and talk about this. So again, I'm sorry for using the word Negro. I'm probably going to get kicked off of YouTube just for reading the quote from Martin Luther King. But I want you to think about this. First of all, he condemns violent protests outright. Outright. There's no question there. There's no like, maybe this is really kind of helping our community. No, we must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence, period. Moreover, he also says that we cannot let this marvelous militancy that has engulfed the black community to lead us to a distrust of all white people. And I think this is particularly important for our times because we've gotten to a place where, this whole white privilege acknowledgement, right? It's like, I am white and therefore I need to acknowledge my privilege. These are the people who basically are espousing that just by virtue of having white skin, by being fair-skinned, that you are racist. And that, moreover, it's really a strange double-edged sword with this white privilege thing. Because on the one hand, they're saying that all white people are racist, and because I'm white, I have to acknowledge that. But then they're also, in saying that they've got this white privilege, they're saying that they're inherently better than blacks. Right? Like they're born better off because they're white. And I can't think of a more racist sentiment than that. But in any event, we have gotten to a place in race relations in this country where it is perfectly acceptable to say something like all white people are racist with a straight face. And this is not something that Martin Luther King espoused. All right? Martin Luther King mentioned here the very fact that there are white people protesting on behalf of black civil rights. Okay? And that's happening today. I mean, a lot of these protests you see across the country, it's not like all of those protesters are black. There's plenty of white people who care about police brutality in this country. There were plenty of white people who fought in the Civil War and died to end slavery. This is not a situation where you can just look at someone's skin tone and know what they think. That is a racist thing in and of itself to say, I can tell just because this person's skin is porcelain that they hate, certain kinds of people. That is making an assumption, a negative assumption about someone based on the color of their skin and nothing else. That's what racism is. Okay, let's go on with Martin Luther King. Let's go through some of the things he actually dreamed about, right? I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I chose that particular quote because he specifically talks about the sons of slaves and the sons of slave owners. And we have all these people now, we had so many politicians in the Democratic, race to become the presidential candidate that were saying that we needed to do reparations. It's like Martin Luther King did not want reparations. He wanted the sons of former slaves and slave owners to be able to sit together as brothers. Let's keep going. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream that one day in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day, right there in Alabama, little black boys and little black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and little white girls as brothers and sisters. So here, Martin Luther King is specifically talking about a state that he views as being viciously racist. And his vision is for white people and black people to sit together, white kids and white kids and black kids together, sharing joy, acting as sisters and brothers, right? I have a dream today that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the south with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free together one day. Sorry, Martin Luther King almost always makes me cry. But really, the whole point of this entire speech is the idea that Martin Luther King hopes that there will come a day when we don't focus on race, where race doesn't define us, where the actions of our ancestors don't prevent us from being in brotherhood with each other, where instead of going into despair over the problems with race in this country, that we find hope in the fact that we're all in this together, that we're all working together, praying together, struggling together, fighting for freedom together. And it's true, the issues of police brutality in this country are not isolated to Black individuals. It's true that George Floyd was a Black individual who was treated horribly. I mean, the grotesque brutality of what the police did to George Floyd is just so disgusting. And I think everyone can agree that no matter what George Floyd did, there is no excuse for a police officer to kneel on a man's neck for 9 minutes, right? But the reason why that is grotesque is not because George Floyd is Black. It might come out that entire thing was totally racially motivated, but we actually don't know that. What we know is that a police officer treated a civilian's life like it was worthless. And cops do that all the time. They do it to white people, they do it to Hispanics, they do it to Asians, they do it to everybody. But the answer is not to become a community and a country that is just so focused on race that before you can even think about a person or talk about a person or judge a person, you have to know what race they are. Something that always bothered me when I was growing up, and with all due respect to my grandmother, I love her so much, and may she rest in peace. But when I would talk about my friends as a kid growing up, or a boyfriend that I had, something like that, my grandmother would always stop me and be like, wait, are they Black or are they white? And as a kid, I was always just like, why does that matter? And as a kid, I grew up learning these lessons. I grew up learning what Martin Luther King taught, which was that the content of my character and how I behave, that's what matters. My actions, what I actually think about things, what I do, what kind of person I am. Those are the things that matter. My race was not supposed to matter. And now I'm being told that my race is like the most important thing, and it defines my whole world. It defines my entire experience. But the truth is, race doesn't define my experience, almost at all. Class might define it partially, but America at least used to be a country where even if you started in a lower class situation, because of the great benefits of entrepreneurship, you actually could rise up to the top. You could become wealthy even if you were poor. Our government and the Federal Reserve has done a lot to destroy those opportunities, or this land of opportunity that we had. But in this day and age, my race is not the principal thing that holds me back. In fact, what really holds me back are all these frickin' people who can't stop talking about my race. I really would have loved if during, job interviews and things after college, or after law school too, after both, that the fact that I could put the Black Law Students Association on my resume was irrelevant, because it should be. Because here's the truth. If you find out, let's say the only thing you know about someone is the color of your skin, of their skin, excuse me. You literally know nothing about that person other than, I guess you might be able to make a ballpark on what their skin tone hue looked like. You know, if someone says this person is black, you might be able to guess what their skin tone is. But you would know nothing of their political beliefs, their religious beliefs, where they grew up, where they're from. Oh, thank you. Now I can read live comments. You would know nothing about what their parents were like, what kind of hardships they've lived through, what kind of jobs they've worked. Like, seriously, race says less about you than even your name, which is something that is subjectively chosen by your parents. But your name might actually tell you something about what your parents are like, right? But your skin tone literally tells you nothing. And we're being told now that it's the most important factor in our lives. We're being told now that the color of your skin will define your entire life trajectory. The color of your skin means, you know, it determines whether or not you can get a good job, whether or not you'll be able to have a good family or live in a good community. And all of that's just bullshit. It is. And it's racist bullshit too, because what they're telling you is that the least racist thing to do is to, look at someone's race first and foremost. But that is just such a perversion of, I mean, they're not even perverting Martin Luther King's message. They're just completely abandoning it. And I tweeted something out about how colorblindness has been and will always be the solution to our racial tensions. And people argued with me. This one guy was saying, no, like, you know, there's reason to take pride in your race. And I'm like, no, there might be reason to take pride in your culture, right? Like, there's reason to take pride in African culture, or there's reason to take pride in European culture, or in American culture, you know? But to take pride in the fact that my skin color is like olive caramel, it's like, what am I proud of? What have I achieved by having this color of skin? Nothing. It means nothing. This hue here on my skin means literally nothing. And we just have to get past that. The culture I grew up in, the culture of my ancestors, all of that I can be proud of. The color of my skin, I mean, being proud of that, that's like being proud of being a brunette, or being proud of having brown eyes. It's like brunette pride. It's like, doesn't that sound absurd? And don't we rightly get mad at white supremacists for being proud of the fact that they're white, in terms of like just the skin tone aspect of that? Moreover, isn't part of the whole problem with eugenics the fact that people were basically trying to, or like that Hitler was trying to create a nation that only looked a certain way? You know, this whole idea that the way people look, you know, like if only we could have a colorful Congress or something, you know, where we had all of these shades of skin tone in Congress and that would somehow make our policies better. It's like, what on earth does having a more colorful room of people have anything to do about their competency or about their morality? I know plenty of people who are white, who are either very poor or very wealthy, who have had major drug problems, or who have been straight as an arrow their whole lives. And the same goes for blacks. I know black people who are way more wealthy than some of the white people I know. Like, I know black people who have so much money that it's like, you couldn't even spend that much money if you tried, okay? So it is not a matter of your skin tone. And we all should be striving to get to a place where we look past that. We look past skin tone. Yes, we can celebrate different cultures, but we don't focus on the hue or the melanin of our skin. There's nothing more stupid than to base an opinion on, if you're going to base your opinion of someone on something, there's nothing more stupid to choose than the color of their skin. And that's actually the specific definition of what being a racist is to make assumptions, especially negative ones, on the basis of someone's skin. And so we have to get back to this idea of understanding that it's not reverse racism to hate white people. That's just racism. And it's also still bad to have prejudice against black people or to have prejudice against Hispanics or Asians. Like, Harvard openly discriminates against Asians. It's like, all of this is bad. We need to go back to the individual and the content of our characters and our actions, our behaviors. That is what matters. And I am so sick of responses to my ideas having to do with my race. It's like, even if you disagreed with my ideas, what does it matter if I'm white or black? Address my ideas, man. That's what matters. So, I have a lot of thoughts. Just reading Martin Luther King, I had all those thoughts. Let's move to Malcolm X. Malcolm X is particularly interesting to me because so many people right now, kind of in the black community, are praising Malcolm X for sort of his earlier speeches and earlier things that he said about how the races can never really get along and all of this. But they must never have gotten to the end of his biography. You know, they only read all the race-baiting stuff and then they put it down. They never got to the last few chapters. So I'm going to read excerpts from the letter from Mecca. This was written by Malcolm X in April of 1964. Okay? So, Malcolm X. Never have I witnessed such sincere hospitality and overwhelming spirit of true brotherhood as is practiced by people of all colors and races here in the ancient Holy Land, the home of Abraham, Muhammad, and all the other prophets of the Holy Scriptures. For the past week, I have been utterly speechless and spellbound by the graciousness I see displayed all around me by people of all colors. There were tens of thousands of pilgrims there from all over the world. They were of all colors, from blue-eyed blondes to black-skinned Africans. But we were all participating in the same ritual, displaying a spirit of unity and brotherhood that my experiences in America had led me to believe never could exist between whites and non-whites. You may be shocked to hear these words coming from me, but on this pilgrimage, what I have seen and experienced has forced me to rearrange much of my thought patterns previously held and to toss aside some of my previous conclusions. This was not too difficult for me. Despite my firm convictions, I have always been a man who tries to face facts and to accept the reality of life as new experience and new knowledge unfolds. I have always kept an open mind, which is necessary to the flexibility that must go hand in hand with every form of intelligent search for truth. During the past 11 days here in the Muslim world, I have eaten from the same plate, drunk from the same glass, and slept in the same bed or on the same rug, while praying to the same God with fellow Muslims whose eyes were open, or whose eyes were the bluest of blue, whose hair was the blondest of blonde, and whose skin was the whitest of white. And in the words and the actions, and in the actions and the deeds of the white Muslims, I felt the same sincerity that I felt among the black African Muslims of Nigeria, Sudan, and Ghana. We were truly all the same. Okay, so that is Malcolm X. I do like Malcolm X. I'm critical of some of his earlier teachings, but you know, that statement from Malcolm X is really powerful. Think about that. We were all the same. They were able to engage in, you know, brotherhood between races that Malcolm X could never have even imagined could exist, because he was too busy being back here in the United States talking about how the white man and the Negro could never get along. But what it took was him going and praying and being among people of all colors to realize that it's not like we're all these different races that can't get along. We're one race, of the human race, right? Races exist, sure, but ultimately it comes down to the fact that we are all human beings, and every individual makes their own choices. And in this situation, his eyes are opened. He's talking about how I had to change my whole worldview because I had this experience with people who don't look like me, and I realized that we're actually all the same. We're all part of the same ritual. We're all part of the same family. We're all brothers. Where is this? language coming from the Black community today? Where is the sense of brotherhood with whites and with Hispanics and with Asians and with whoever? You know, it's just so sad that we've gotten to a place where people really think that white people and Black people can't get along. People want to abandon Martin Luther King's dream. People want to tell Malcolm X that the experience he had in Mecca that changed his life, that he changed his opinion in a way that was actually wrong, you know? That's when he was wrong, was when he actually found brotherhood with his fellow man of all races and colors. I just really beg and pray that the American people can come back to this idea of the individual. And moreover, that when we come together as individuals, it's not about our race. You know, we can come together as Americans. We can fight for freedom together. We can fight police brutality together. You know, we don't have to be doing this through the lens of race. We can examine history together and look at the flaws of our, you know, of our founders and the positive things that they did as one group of people. We don't have to be like, well, as a Black person, I think X. As a white person, I say X. It's like, enough. Enough. I don't care. I don't care what your race is. What have you done in your life? When you wake up in the morning, what do you go do? How do you treat your family? How do you treat your neighbors? And if we can't care about that, if all we care about is the color of our skin, I mean, we are going to face some really dark times in this country. The only reason we got through the civil rights movement without massive violence and maybe another civil war was because we embraced these ideas of colorblindness, because we were finally smart enough to say, race is not that important. And all of this focus on race has done us no good. And I would like to point out as well that the people who claim that races can't get along and that we should separate, they are literally making an argument for separate but equal. Literally. Which I thought, and I was always taught, was one of the most abhorrent philosophies that was ever perpetuated in this country. But apparently the idea that we can be separate among the races and still be equal is now fine and acceptable. And that's actually the not racist thing to think now. But that's absurd. We have to fight back against this. And we need, like, because we live, unfortunately, in this era where people focus so much on race, we need Blacks in the Black community who see this and who care about this to speak up, you know? I'm only one person. And a lot of people these days want to take away whatever race card I claim to have because I don't look Black enough, right? So, but if we don't put this in check, I mean, we're going to be like South Africa up in here. Like apartheid, like, do you guys remember this history? It's all fun and games until you're back in a situation where, you know, Black people have to drink out of different water fountains and stuff, or where neighborhoods literally are segregated by race. It's really absurd. We have to fight this, guys. We have to fight this. So, I don't know. I've ranted a lot about race. I actually really hate talking about it and thinking about it. I'm really upset that I even have to do this segment. But let me look at the live chat. There's a few people on here. Looney Tunes is this show. King's last book, Where We Go From Here, provides a more complete version of his views on civil unrest and racial angst. Of course, I bet she's never read the book. Hi, Lamont Corbin. I love how you're talking about me like I can't read what you're saying. Well, you know, maybe in there he praises violence, but I would be surprised if Martin Luther King did. And, you know, it's really gross to basically to say, like, let's say that Martin Luther King did in a different book say that. Was he remembered for those messages, or did people change their minds or have their hearts and minds changed on race because of the I have a dream speech. You know? So respectfully, Lamont, I really don't care what you think about this. Martin Luther King was an advocate of peace and all of the ways, or in every way that people publicly talk about him. You know? And if you want to come up in here and talk about how Martin Luther King is in favor of violence, then you do you, homie, but don't act like you're righteous for trying to defend violence and rioting and looting. Letitia says, what do you think of the Jane Elliott blue-brown eye experiment? I'm not familiar with that. Do you know what that is, Edgar?
Yeah, she did an extensive, she's done it on Oprah, she did it with school kids, and segregated kids based off of the color of
their eyes.
Their eyes.
Oh, weird.
It's a really cool experiment.
Oh, cool. Well, yeah, I'll have to look into that. I wasn't familiar with that. But anyway, that's so funny. By the way, Lamont, thank you for taking the time out of your evening to watch my show. I'm really glad that I can occupy a part of your mind this evening. You know, it's just like, if you don't like the things I say, then just stop watching, homie. All right, let's move on. So, I'm going to talk about the right to bear arms as it pertains to the Property Manifesto. I think that this is particularly important in our current era because we have places that are disbanding police, and part of the right to bear arms really, or why I care about it, is because the police really aren't sufficient to protect you or defend you. And in a situation where you don't have any police, then the right to bear arms is even more important. So let's go through that. As usual, most of the rights that I talk about with the Property Manifesto here impact all four kinds of property, which, as you recall, are real property, private property, property of body, and property of mind. So, in terms of your real property, well, actually, let me go back. Before I even get into real property, your right to bear arms is your right to protect all four kinds of property. That's what it is. It's your right to defend it and protect it against whatever would do those four kinds of property harm, right? That's the basics there. But it does touch on all four, which is why it's a biggie, right? So let's talk about real property. In terms of your right to possess, control, and enjoy your real property, this goes to your firearms because, first of all, if you're controlling your property, that means you control what you bring onto it. So if you want to bring guns onto your property, then that's up to you. The property is your possession, that land is your possession. If you want to have firearms on that land, that's your choice. Also, if you want to enjoy it, or enjoy your firearms on that land, that's your choice too. So, if you had enough land where you could build a shooting range, where you wouldn't accidentally hit someone, like a neighbor, right? Because obviously, your right to bear arms stops if you shoot someone or injure someone else without a valid justification, right? But in terms of enjoying your land, if you wanted to put a shooting range on your land and shoot, at clay pigeons or targets or whatever, that's you getting to enjoy your real property. The right to exclude. This is, I think, where we really think about the right to bear arms in terms of real property, because this is the classic story where it's like, if you come on my land, you might face a shotgun. Now, to be clear, as I talked about with trespass by necessity on the issue of abortion, you can't just shoot a trespasser just because they're a trespasser. Now, if a trespasser is on your land threatening your life, then obviously that's a little bit different. If they come at you with deadly force, you can respond with deadly force. But certainly, if there's a trespasser on your land, you can threaten them with a gun. I mean, it depends on state by state, the specific laws on that. But in my proprietarian manifesto, you can definitely threaten someone on your land with a gun to get off your land. Okay? The right to destroy and convey real property doesn't really apply to the Second Amendment, so I'm going to skip those. But and the right to exclude from your property is the biggest thing. And when we talk about the right to bear arms against the government, that really is one of the biggest factors. Is actually the right to exclude from your real property. Because, I mean, I don't know about everybody, but part of the reason why I bought a rifle, which is awesome, I finally got it and have it in my possession. But part of the reason why I bought a rifle is to protect my home, right? And that's not just to protect it against burglars or whoever, but I mean, the world has lost its frickin' mind, right? Like if the police all of a sudden are going to start enforcing laws that aren't even laws because they were written by governors, and then simultaneously release all the prisoners who were like rapists and murderers and stuff. It's like, I don't know. I've got to have the ability to defend my real property from all of these crazy people, right? From the police who might try to take my gun without a warrant because of red flag laws, or from all the crazy people who are now unhinged because they're out of work and might be wanting food or supplies or whatever, or just from these crazy rioters and looters who just think it's cool to destroy private property, right? So that, like, the whole idea of the right to bear arms, I think the way that people usually think about it actually pertains to your real estate, which is that, my house is my castle, and I can defend it with the deadly force if I want. In terms of personal property, so in terms of the right to bear arms, part of it is actually just the right to possess a firearm in and of itself as part of your right to personal property, right? Like you get to choose what kind of firearm you possess. You get to choose how you control it, how you enjoy it, right? Like that's part of your right in your ownership of a firearm is to have it in your hands, right? To possess it, have it in your home, to have it in your car, in your purse, whatever. To control it, you decide when you shoot it, when you discharge it, right? And to enjoy it again, like if I want to go to the shooting range, which I do enjoy, that's a matter of me enjoying my personal property. The right to exclude, it's pretty straightforward, just like with real estate. I mean, this is basically your right to defend yourself against theft. Now, it's kind of messed up with our government because with tax withholding, I mean, they rob us without us even getting to see them, right? But this is the whole idea, like, if I were getting mugged on the street, or like if someone pulled a gun on me on the street, I could pull a gun back on them and say, like, hell no, you're not taking my purse. So yeah, it's the right to exclude. Let's see, the right to destroy. I mean, you can use your right to bear arms to destroy things so long as you're destroying your own personal property. So like when I'm talking about going to the shooting range and shooting clay pigeons, or even on your own land shooting clay pigeons, I mean, basically whatever targets you're shooting at, you're gonna destroy, right? So there is an aspect of the right to destroy personal property in the right to bear arms. And then the right to convey personal property. I mean, this is the whole idea that you should be able to buy and sell firearms freely. Again, this is why I'm against background checks. I don't think that it's like you've got a right to defend yourself with whatever weapons are available. Okay, especially if the government is also using those weapons, because it's about making an equal playing field here. Huh? Oh, I got a comment. What about excluding people from your restaurant? I think you know what I'm getting at. Yeah, I mean, that is a specific issue within the property manifesto that I would like to address in a later podcast. Because it's a more complicated answer than I'd like to get into here. Because I think that in general, yeah, you should be able to exclude people from your property for any reason. Now, if I found out that a restaurant was excluding people from their property because they were black, personally, I would never go to that restaurant again. And I would probably, I'd be the first person to be, up on my social media talking about how you should boycott that place. But, if that person wants to destroy their business, that's their own thing. But, it's a very complicated issue, and it's one that I would prefer to have an entire segment to talk about. And it is one that I have a segment of the Property Manifesto planned to, I have a segment planned to address that already. Let's see, Alonzo says, how much of a role do you think gun rights infringement and not having the right to exclude plays in race relations? I guess I'm not exactly sure what you mean. One thing that I can say is that when they did free the slaves, the first thing that they did was prohibit them from buying firearms. And why would you think that is? It's because free men have guns, slaves don't. And that's a kind of a blunt statement, but seriously, it's like, if you don't have the right to defend yourself with whatever technology exists, like to defend your life with a gun, if you don't have that right, then I mean, really, you don't really own yourself, right? Because you're not even charged with the ability to protect yourself. I do think that, I mean, I'm not really sure how, like, other than the fact that gun control has specifically targeted black communities and that black people for a long time have kind of been, sort of told, so to speak, that like guns are bad, and they've sort of voted for politicians who want to ban guns. I do think that at the same time, there's people from all colors and stripes that love their Second Amendment. Like, I don't think it's really a race issue. Other than the fact that governments have tried to use it to control black people. In any event. So, yeah, and that's all the comments. Anyway, so let's get back to the other two kinds of property. So the property of body, the right to control, I mean, this is sort of my ability to carry it without a permit. Like, I'm a proponent of constitutional carry because I think that my license to carry a firearm is the Second Amendment. And actually, even without that, there should be no prohibition on me carrying a firearm because it's really just a means of self-defense. And so, like, what I decide to carry on my person is really a choice about how I control my property of body, and there shouldn't be restrictions on that. Some states are open carry states, but a lot of states aren't. A lot of states, you either have to conceal it or you can't carry a weapon at all. So that's the right to control. The right to exclude from your body, I mean, this is the whole idea that, if someone's trying to kill me or rape me, I can use my gun to exclude them from my property of body, right? Rape is literally someone trying to force themselves into your property of body, force themselves into you, so to speak. And so to exclude them, I can use my firearm. The right to destroy your property of body is really just, again, I talked about this when I was talking about the right to destroy in general, in terms of property of body, but, if you wanted to use a firearm to end your own life, that's actually your own right. Please don't do that. Suicide is really horrible and it hurts everyone around you. But that would be the right to destroy. And also, in this regard, I mean, we talk, like, I don't know if you guys remember that story. I think it was last summer or something, but there was some FBI agent here in Denver who had a firearm on him at, like, a bar and did a backflip, and the gun, like, flew out. And he picked it up, and someone ended up getting shot, I think, because he picked it up by the trigger. Which is like, okay, I cannot think of a dumber, of like a dumber series of events. It's like, first of all, don't bring your gun out drinking. Second of all, don't have it in a holster that's that loose. Third of all, don't do a backflip while you have a gun in a holster that's loose. Fourth of all, never pick up a gun by a trigger, okay? But in terms of the right to destroy, this is the idea that if someone does something stupid with their own gun, like they literally shoot themselves in the foot, or they're trying to do a trick with a gun and they injure themselves, it's actually kind of their right to do that. You know, it's sort of a Darwin situation happening there. But if you injure yourself with your own gun, that's your right. I would encourage you to train with your firearm and to learn how to use it well. Maybe take some classes from Edgar at Guns for Everyone. Learn how to actually use your firearm well so that you don't accidentally use your right to destroy your own body on accident. I said accident twice in that sentence. That was great. And the last one is your property of mind. In terms of your right to enjoy your property of mind, I mean, this is with your right to bear arms. This is kind of silly, but this is like kind of my choice to buy an 1866 Yellow Boy, even though, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, that's not, you can't kill nearly as many guys with that. It's like, well, yeah, there might be guns that are more efficient in terms of killing than my lever action, but I like it. You know, I like the aesthetics of it. It was my choice after perusing many firearms to buy it. So, you know, it actually is a property of mind issue. What kind of gun you want to have? Do you want a revolver? Do you want a semi-automatic? Do you want a rifle? Do you want a shotgun? I mean, all of this is actually a property of mind issue, your choice in that regard, which is partially why it's really stupid for these politicians to, well, first of all, it's stupid because they don't actually know what these words mean. But when politicians come out and say, like, we're going to ban all semi-automatic rifles, basically, that's partially a property of mind violation because they're actually telling you that you don't get to decide what form of self-defense that you'd like to use, which is actually a choice of your own conscience. Again, in terms of the right to exclude, this is sort of like using your firearm to prevent people from trying to enforce wrongthink or trying to enforce religious beliefs on you or anything like that. You know, it's like someone comes to your house, kicks in your door and says, denounce Christ. It's like, I can take out my rifle and say, get the fuck out of here. So that is the right to exclude in terms of property of mind in your firearms. In terms of the right to destroy, again, it goes to suicide again with that. But really, the right to bear arms, it's a big deal, man. This is your right to protect yourself from whoever would do you harm. It goes to all four kinds of property, and the people who wanted to poo-poo this or act like the Second Amendment was something that we should just throw away. These are people who have a fundamental misunderstanding of human rights and natural rights and the right of a person to defend themselves. Because ultimately, the Second Amendment is a right about self-defense. And some people get mad at me when I say that, but when I say self-defense, I'm not just talking about other people. I'm talking about the government too. I'm talking about wild animals. I'm talking about crazy rioters or whoever you need to defend yourself from, whatever the entity, including the government. That is what the Second Amendment is about. And the right to self-defense is so fundamental. I mean, the idea that if someone is attacking you and you can't fight back, I think that would be universally, disavowed. It's like, if you're getting attacked, you can't fight back. Or like to say it's immoral to fight back when you've been attacked with deadly force. I don't think that anyone believes that. Even the people who hate the Second Amendment, I don't think actually believe that. They just are so fixated on the object, right? They're so fixated on this idea that guns are dangerous and bad. And if only like in a picture of a shooting, if only I could just remove the gun from that situation, everything would be fine. But, you know, as with the race issue, there's so much more nuance here. You can't just say guns bad, take away guns, everything's fine. If you take, like, even if you could actually manage to take away all the guns in the United States, which would be impossible at this point, just given how many guns are in America, how widespread they are, like, you're not going to be able to get rid of them. But even if you could, all you would be doing is making sure that a woman like me would be unable to defend myself against like a 200-pound guy who would try to rape me. That's all that you would do. It would not make anyone safer. All you would be doing would be taking away the equality that a gun provides. It's called the great equalizer for a reason, because me at 5'4" and like 110 pounds, I could still stop a huge dude in his tracks who wanted to do me harm. Whether it's at my house or whether I'm walking down the street or whatever. So that's what the Second Amendment's all about. And that's what the right to bear arms is all about. And why in a propertarian society, the right to bear arms would be protected in the highest esteem, right behind freedom of speech and religion, just like in our Bill of Rights. But I do want to mention, as I briefly touched on earlier, that there are limitations to the right to bear arms in that as soon as you start infringing on someone else's property rights, then you're not acting within your own rights anymore. So that's why you can't just shoot anyone, right? Like, just because you have the right to control your firearm as personal property doesn't mean that you can just go out willy-nilly firing your gun in the street, because that's reckless. You're showing basically a disregard for human life and the fact that you might kill someone with that. So there's sorry, I'm dropping my pen. There's responsibility that comes along with owning a firearm and having such a right. But that doesn't mean, just because people can do harm with a firearm doesn't mean that the right to bear arms should be abolished. And quite frankly, I stand by that an armed society is a polite society, and that if these mass shooters, like the shooter we had here in Denver who went to the Batman shooting, if that guy had thought that any movie theater he went to in Denver had the potential to have multiple people concealed carrying a firearm in there, I really don't think that he would have done that act of violence. Because the truth is, what that shooter did before he went in there was he looked around, he went online, and he found a movie theater that prohibited firearms. And that's where he went, because he knew that everyone in that theater was going to be unarmed. So you can't... I actually think that if people were walking around thinking that everyone I interact with might have a gun, our mass shootings would go down big time. Big time. But please use your firearms responsibly. Use your right to bear arms responsibly. Use it only in defensive and justified ways. Do not use it out of aggression. And yeah, that is the right to bear arms as it pertains to the Property Manifesto. And I know you're not mic'd, but do you want to say anything on that, Edgar? Because I know it's like the gun thing is your thing,
No, not everything that you've already covered, so.
Okay. And I don't know if you were mic'd for that, but Edgar said that he didn't have anything to say I didn't already cover. So, in any event. And with that, let's just move on to the Saints. I'm sure that I've gone long on this podcast, so I'll try to be brief.
You have some comments, though.
I have some more. Let's see. Oh, how do you feel about the call for the removal of statues for anyone who owns slaves? Oh my gosh, I got in so much trouble on Twitter for talking about my opinions on this. I am vehemently against destroying statues on the basis that they are offensive. If a local city or something wanted to come to the conclusion that a statue should be moved into a museum so that it could better be explained, I guess, in historical context, I would be okay with that. But I am absolutely disgusted and appalled by all of these people who are just throwing ropes around these statues of Christopher Columbus or Robert E. Lee or whatever and just yanking them down. All these people are doing is destroying art. That's it. And they're destroying art that they would never in a million years be able to recreate. So, I'm sorry. I don't care if you don't like Christopher Columbus, The fact that art offends you is not a justification to destroy it, okay? And people in my comments were like, ugh, art dedicated to, someone who massacred Native Americans and who was a rapist and all that. It's like, first of all, I'm really sick of the fact that people can't even distinguish the explorers and the conquistadors anymore, right? Like people just blend Columbus, De Soto, Cortez. All those people are just like one guy, apparently. And moreover, they act as if our founding fathers all had the same opinions on slavery. And also that everyone in the South was in favor of slavery, which is actually not true, or that everyone in the North was against it. You know, the only reason why people are destroying these monuments is because they have no understanding of history, or they have a Reader's Digest version that they learned and they think that they know everything, and so they're just going to go around destroying art. But the truth is, if Christopher Columbus or Robert E. Lee is such an offensive character and they committed such atrocities, we should not destroy monuments to them. Because the truth is, to the extent that atrocities were committed against my ancestors in this country with the whole slavery thing, I don't want that forgotten. Because when you destroy art and you destroy history because you are offended by it and you can't get past the historical context of it, all you are doing is ensuring that future generations will have a harder time learning the lessons from those atrocities. Like, so much of the reason why people don't understand the atrocities of communism is because they never learned about it, you know? They were never taught that. So every generation has to relearn the history and relearn the atrocities of the past. And destroying art will not help us do that. And especially the sculptures. Do you know how hard it is to sculpt some of that stuff? How much effort and time went into that? Are these people who are vandalizing cathedrals, thinking that they are like have the upper hand or they're acting in favor of social justice? Do you know how much blood and sweat and tears went into building these beautiful architectural achievements? I mean, give me a break. And by the way, are we going to tear down the pyramids and the Sphinx? Because those were built by slaves, right? I mean, those were built to honor people who owned slaves en masse, who were dictators, who claimed to be God. But no one has ever suggested tearing down the pyramids, and that's because people are not so stupid to think that tearing down such an architectural achievement like that is worthwhile just because its origins offend you. And I'm sorry to go on such a rant about that, but it just truly disgusts me that the destruction of art is being hailed this way. I don't know. These are children throwing a tantrum. That's what they're doing. Okay, let's see. The great equalizing, the government took the gunses. I don't know what those comments mean. Natural right to bear arms seems self-evident to me, but it's a hard sell in my experience, says Alonzo. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just because people have been so frightened by the idea of like guns are dangerous and scary. As you all can probably tell, people in America are very willing to freak out and be hysterical in the face of even the smallest risk of death. So, you know, people basically, like, there's people who literally think that a gun might just go off by itself, you know? Because they just don't know anything about firearms. People are so uneducated on this issue. Okay, so to the saints. So the saints I'd like to talk about tonight are Saint Jude and Saint Dymphna, which is a hard one for me to pronounce. But the reason why I want to talk about these saints, Saint Jude is the patron saint of chaos and impossible causes. And Saint Dymphna is the patron saint of both mental and spiritual illness. So basically, I want to talk about these saints because I think that we need them now more than ever. We need their help more than ever. And when I talk about saints, I talk about them as if I'm talking about some siblings of mine to whom, you know, I go to so they can kind of, you know, they can advocate on my behalf to God because I'm not really very good at it. They've already done a good job of it, and these are their specialties, right? So let's talk about St. Jude for a second. People are probably at least familiar with the name St. Jude because of St. Jude's Children's Hospital. And it makes sense that that hospital is named after St. Jude because those are kids who unfortunately have really severe usually like life-threatening or fatal illnesses or cancers. So the whole idea is that St. Jude is, you pray to St. Jude when you're in a case or in a situation where it's just like, I don't see a way out of this. This seems impossible, right? And so for these kids in the hospital, it's like, it seems impossible that this child might be able to recover from this illness. But that's why we trust in St. Jude. So St. Jude was actually one of the first apostles of Jesus. His name was originally Judas, but in order to avoid confusion between Judas Iscariot and Judas Thaddeus, who was St. Jude, they changed his name to St. Jude pretty early on because, you know, Judas Iscariot kind of betrayed Jesus. Not exactly a good guy in the Bible. They didn't want these two guys getting confused. It's believed, and they can't know for sure because, again, he's one of Jesus' first apostles, so his life is a little bit shaky in terms of what we know. But he basically is thought to be one of Jesus' cousins, which is kind of cool. I would love to have been one of Jesus' cousins. He was married. He had at least one child, all of that. Part of the reason why he is the patron saint of impossible causes is because basically there was a king, I think it was in Mesopotamia. Maybe it's on the back page here. Oh, King Abgar of Edessa had been suffering from chronic, horrible leprosy. And he had heard about Jesus and had sent for someone to go fetch Jesus to bring him back to heal him, because he had heard that Jesus had done all this miracle working and healing. But by the time his messenger guy got to Israel, Jesus had already been crucified. But St. Jude was there. And St. Jude was like, well, I'll go. And basically, the story goes that upon showing this king an image of Jesus, his leprosy was healed. And this king had been trying to heal himself of leprosy for a really long time. Everyone thought it was impossible and he'd be afflicted with it forever. But St. Jude healed him, and thus, you know, the impossible causes. St. Jude was martyred, as most of the original saints were. His bones can be found, are buried in St. Peter's Basilica, along with a lot of the other saints who were martyred along with him. St. Dymphna, she was a little bit later in time. Her story is crazy, okay? Basically, she was a very beautiful girl, and when she was 14 years old, her mother died, I think of an illness of some kind, you know, sickness. And her father was like so messed up in the head that he basically said that Dymphna was going to have to replace his wife. And I mean that in all ways, not in terms of just taking care of the house, but sexually as well. And Dymphna, prior to this, had already said that she was going to remain chaste forever and had already dedicated herself to Christ and all that. And she was actually able to flee her father, who tried to rape her at 14. But eventually he caught up to her and the person who helped her escape, and he killed her. And because of her father's mental illness and because she suffered at the hands of his mental illness, she is the patron saint of mental illness. And I mean, just thinking about that's crazy. But basically she was just killed because she didn't want to succumb to his demands of being, his sexual partner, even though he was her father. So while both of these saints were martyred, and I mean, it's not like their patron saints of something particularly happy, but I think that right now, personally, I look at the state of the United States and it freaking scares me, man. I don't really know what's gonna happen. I've been watching documentaries on the Civil War to actually help myself feel better. Just to the extent that if we could get through the Civil War, we could probably get through whatever this is, right? This fourth turning. I try to put it in perspective that way. But I do think that it seems impossible right now. So that's why I wanted to talk about St. Jude. And in terms of St. Dymphna, I mean, my God, it seems like we've lost our minds. You know, I mean, the double speak, the hypocrisy, the move from, you have to stay inside or you're a murderer to if you're not out protesting, then you're a racist. It's like, well, what is it? Which is it? You know? The healthcare professional saying that if you protest against the lockdowns, that's safe, but if you protest against racism, if you protest against the lockdowns, that's dangerous, but if you protest against racism, that's safe. I just think the world has lost its damn mind. So, I'd like to close with a little prayer to these saints. And I'm sorry, Edgar, it's going to make you cringe, but I'm going to start in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. St. Jude and St. Dymphna, I ask you both to look down on the United States right now and to see this seemingly impossible, insane situation that we're in, and to graciously go to God the Father and our Lord Jesus Christ and ask them for their intercession in our lives and for an end to the violence, for an end to all of the racism and race baiting, for an end to all of the hysteria, for an end to all of the fear and all of the hatred and all of the mental and spiritual illness that is driving people to despair and to have, really lost hope in this country. I pray that President Trump, as much of a power-hungry authoritarian that he is, will act wisely in response to what is happening in all of these states, and that you will pray for us, St. Jude and St. Dymphna, to the Lord our God, that we get through this chaotic fourth turning alive. And with that, I will end my podcast tonight. I'd like to thank everybody so much for tuning in to Down the Rabbit Hole tonight. If you like this podcast and you want to support my work, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Nina Down the Rabbit Hole, and that's where you'll find me. I actually took the time to set up tiers on there, and I will fulfill all of my promises for the various tiers. If you decide to be in some of the higher up tiers, there's certain, individualized messages and things that you'll get as a thank you from me. So please consider becoming a patron. I would like to thank Brett and Colin, my two patrons that I have thus far. I really appreciate your support. You help to make this podcast possible every week. I want to thank Edgar, my producer, for also sponsoring this, and Guns for Everyone, who makes this podcast possible as well. If you're in Colorado and you want to take a concealed carry class, Guns for Everyone offers them for free. So please check out their website, gunsforeveryone.com, to sign up for a class, either concealed carry or, like I said, you should learn how to use your firearm well. So if you want to take a class on pistols or anything like that, they have a variety of classes that they offer throughout the year. So please check out Guns for Everyone. Thank you, Edgar, as always, for helping me be here tonight. But if you really want to support this podcast, if you really want to help me, the best thing that you can do is just share this with anyone who you would think would like to listen. I talk about really controversial topics on here. I'm sure the YouTube algorithms are crushing me. So just share this with anyone that you would think would like to hear it. And hopefully I will be back sooner than 3 weeks next time. No promises, though. But regardless, until I see you next time, please live free, everyone. And I hope you have a great rest of your June.